The Howling Ridge was a place spoken of in whispers throughout the borderlands, a jagged mountain range that served as the natural boundary between human settlements and the wild territories claimed by werewolf packs. The ridge was a treacherous landscape of windswept cliffs and narrow paths built generations ago when the territories were first divided following the Great War. Though decades of uneasy peace had passed, replaced by careful treaties and designated neutral zones, the ridge remained a place most avoided, its edges sharp with the memories of those who had fallen during the conflict. At the highest point of these cliffs, where the wind howled with a sound that gave the mountains their name and the mist rose from depths so far below that no one had ever measured them, there were legends of enchanted chains. The stories spoke of dark magic used during the war, of curses that bound not just bodies but souls, chains forged not with ordinary metal but with spells woven by sorcerers long dead. It was here, on this precipice forgotten by mercy and avoided by the wise, that a wolf had been suspended for nearly 5 years. The wolf was a magnificent creature, even in his cursed and weakened state. His fur was a mixture of silver and charcoal that seemed to shift in the fading light, and his eyes were a burning amber color that glowed with an intensity that seemed almost supernatural even in broad daylight. He was massive, larger than any natural wolf should be, the size that marked him unmistakably as something more than ordinary. And even bound by chains that pulsed with an eerie golden light, chains that wrapped around his torso and legs and burned with magic that kept him suspended over the abyss, there was something about him that radiated ancient power and unbroken will. No one came to this part of the ridge anymore. Nobody in the borderlands knew who he truly was or how he came to be imprisoned in such a manner. To the few travelers who had glimpsed him from safer paths, he was just another casualty of the old war, perhaps a werewolf who had committed some terrible crime against his own kind, destined to hang suspended between earth and sky until the magic finally consumed him or the chains corroded and sent him plummeting into the endless mist. The local councils occasionally debated whether they had a responsibility to investigate or intervene, but always concluded that ancient werewolf magic was beyond their jurisdiction and best left undisturbed. But for now he simply hung there, forgotten by everyone except the wind that carried his silent howls across the mountains. That was about to change because of Linda Safepaw, a young woman of 28 who traveled the borderlands alone. Linda was a wanderer, her family having been killed in one of the brutal rogue werewolf attacks that occasionally shattered the fragile peace when she was barely 23. She had been away gathering herbs in the forest when the attack came, returning to find her entire village consumed by flames and blood. She had been raised by a loving family in a tight-knit community, so to speak, learning herbalism from her grandmother and finding purpose in healing others. It was a peaceful life, and Linda had been grateful for the simple joys of home and belonging. But that life had ended in a single night of terror and golden eyes gleaming in firelight. 5 years ago, unable to return to the ruins of her village or settle in any new community, Linda had become a wanderer. She traveled from settlement to settlement, trading her considerable skills as an herbalist for food and shelter, never staying long enough to form attachments. It was a lonely existence, and the isolation was self-imposed, but Linda convinced herself it was safer this way. Safer to trust no one. Safer to feel nothing. Safer to keep moving before the nightmares of that night could catch up to her. 3 weeks ago, Linda had been tracking a rare medicinal plant that only grew at high altitudes. Her work as a traveling herbalist had brought her to the most remote regions of the Howling Ridge, areas where few others ventured. The plant she sought, Silverleaf ironically named, was said to have powerful healing properties, and a settlement 2 days south had offered good coin for a substantial supply. It was dangerous work climbing these treacherous paths, but danger had become familiar to Linda, almost welcome. Physical danger, at least, was something she could see and avoid. It was simpler than the dangers of connection, of trust, of allowing anyone close enough to wound her heart again. The first time Linda ventured onto the high cliff path, following the silver-green glimmer of the rare plant growing in rocky crevices, her breath caught in her throat from more than just the thin mountain air. The wind was fierce up here, tugging at her travel-worn cloak and long hair. One misstep would send her plummeting into the mist-shrouded abyss below. But Linda had learned to move carefully through dangerous places. It had become a metaphor for her entire life. She was focused on her work, carefully harvesting leaves and storing them in her leather satchel when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the wind or falling rocks. a rattling like chains moving in the breeze, accompanied by something that might have been a low, pained growl. Linda froze, every muscle tensing. That sound triggered memories she had spent 5 years trying to bury, the sounds of that night of snarling and screaming and death. Her first instinct was to flee, to climb back down the path and abandon this cursed place. But curiosity, that dangerous human trait that had saved her life as often as it had endangered it, made her creep forward toward the cliff's edge. What she saw there stole the air from her lungs and sent her heart hammering against her ribs. A wolf hung suspended over the void, wrapped in chains that glowed with a light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The chains were anchored to stone pillars carved with ancient runes, holding the massive creature in a position that looked agonizing, legs partially extended, head hanging low, the entire weight supported by enchanted bonds that burned where they touched fur. The wolf was clearly suffering. Linda could see the shallow rise and fall of his breathing, the tremors that occasionally ran through his powerful frame, and the way the magical chains seemed to sear his skin with an otherworldly heat that produced wisps of smoke where metal met flesh. Linda approached the edge cautiously, keeping her distance from the anchoring pillars but close enough to see clearly. The wolf raised his head slowly as if even that movement required immense effort, and his eyes locked onto hers. Linda expected to see the feral hunger she remembered from that terrible night 5 years ago. She expected rage and bloodlust and the soulless violence that had torn her world apart. But what she saw was something that shook the very foundations of the walls she had built around her heart. Intelligence. Deep, ancient, and unmistakable intelligence. And beneath that, something that looked heartbreakingly like hope. She stumbled backward, almost losing her footing on the rocky ground. This couldn't be real. Werewolves were monsters. Killers. The creatures that had destroyed everything she loved. The stories she had been raised with, the beliefs that had been reinforced by her own trauma, all painted them as beasts without conscience or soul. But those eyes, those amber eyes that glowed like captured sunlight, there was someone looking at her from behind them. Not something. Someone. Linda retreated from the cliff's edge, climbing back to a safer distance. But she couldn't bring herself to leave entirely. She set up a small camp in a sheltered area nearby, telling herself she was just resting before the climb down, that she needed to process her supply of silverleaf before the journey back. But the truth was that the image of those chains, that suffering, those impossibly aware eyes, had latched onto something deep in her consciousness and wouldn't let go. She tried to sleep that night but couldn't. The wind carried sounds from the cliff, the rattle of chains and occasionally, something that might have been a whimper of pain. Each sound felt like a needle pressing against her carefully maintained defenses. In the gray light before dawn, Linda found herself approaching the cliff's edge again, drawn by a compulsion she couldn't name or understand. The wolf was hanging motionless and for a terrible moment she thought he might be dead. But then his eyes opened, finding her immediately as if he had sensed her presence before she even appeared. They stared at each other across the distance. Woman and wolf. Victim and monster. Or was it something more complicated than that? Linda's mind warred with itself. Everything she believed, everything she had experienced told her to walk away. This creature might not have been one of the specific wolves that destroyed her village, but he was certainly the same type of being. Showing mercy to a werewolf was not just foolish, it was a betrayal of everyone she had lost. But there was another voice, quieter but growing stronger, that whispered different words. The voice that remembered her grandmother teaching her that healing was not about deserving but about necessity. The voice that recalled how her parents had always judged individuals by their actions, not their species. The voice that asked a simple, devastating question. If she walked away from suffering when she had the power to help, what did that make her? It was in the second morning that Linda did something that would change the course of her life forever, though she couldn't have known it then. She approached the cliff's edge again, but this time she came with purpose. She had noticed something the day before. The anchor points holding the chains were accessible from the cliff path. The chains themselves pulsed with magic she didn't understand, but the physical stone pillars they were attached to showed signs of erosion from years of weathering. Linda knew this was madness. She knew that even if she could somehow free this creature, it would likely kill her the moment it was released. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to turn away. But she couldn't. Something about those eyes, about the intelligence and suffering she saw in them, called to a part of herself she thought had died in the flames of her village. So she began examining the anchor points, testing the stone, trying to understand the mechanism of the imprisonment. The wolf watched her with an intensity that should have been terrifying, but Linda found herself talking to him as she worked, a nervous habit from years of traveling alone. "I don't know why I'm doing this," she murmured, running her hands over the carved runes. "You could kill me. You probably will. But I can't. I can't just leave someone to suffer like this, even if that someone is." She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. The wolf made a sound, low and rumbling, that might have been acknowledgement. Linda continued her examination, and what she discovered both relieved and terrified her. The chains weren't simply physical restraints. They were held in place by a curse that pulsed through the metal with visible magic. But there was something else, an inscription barely visible on one of the pillars, written in an ancient script she partially recognized from her grandmother's old texts. She traced the words with trembling fingers, speaking them aloud as she deciphered their meaning. "Bound by betrayal, held by hatred, freed only by the mercy of one who has cause for vengeance." Linda's breath caught. This was a specific curse, one designed with particular conditions for breaking. And the terrible irony wasn't lost on her. She, who had every reason to hate werewolves, who had lost everything to their violence, was exactly the type of person this curse was designed to test. She looked up at the suspended wolf, and in that moment understanding passed between them. This wasn't a random encounter. This was a choice point, a moment where the universe itself seemed to hold its breath waiting for her decision. Linda Safepaw stood at the edge of the abyss, her hand hovering over the chain's anchor point, and felt the weight of her past pressing against the possibility of a different future. The wolf's amber eyes held hers, pleading and patient and impossibly aware. "I must be insane," Linda whispered to the wind. But even as she said it, she was reaching forward, grasping the glowing chain, feeling it burn hot against her palm. The moment her skin made contact with the cursed metal, something extraordinary happened. The chains erupted with golden light so bright Linda had to shield her eyes. Magic surged through the metal like lightning, and she felt a shock run through her entire body, not painful but profound, as if something fundamental in the fabric of reality had just shifted. The wolf threw back his head and howled, a sound that echoed across the mountains and seemed to shake the very stones beneath Linda's feet. And in that howl, Linda heard not bestial rage, but something achingly close to relief and triumph. The chains began to crack, golden light spilling from the fractures like liquid fire. Linda stumbled backward, watching in awe and terror as the ancient curse shattered under the power of a choice it had waited 5 years for someone to make. The choice of mercy over vengeance, understanding over hatred, hope over despair. And as the chains finally exploded in a shower of golden sparks and the wolf's massive body began to fall toward the stone cliff path where Linda stood, she realized with absolute clarity that her life would never be the same. She had broken more than just physical chains in that moment. She had broken the chains around her own heart, the ones forged from trauma and grief and the absolute certainty that some wounds could never heal. The wolf landed heavily on the stone, and Linda watched, transfixed, as his form began to shimmer and shift. This was the moment she should run, the moment every instinct told her to flee before the monster showed its true nature. But Linda stood her ground, heart pounding, hand still burning from where she had touched the cursed chains, and waited to see what truth she had just unleashed upon the world. Whatever happened next, she had made her choice. And somehow, deep in her soul, she knew it was the right one. Before we dive into Linda's impossible choice on the cliff's edge, I need to ask something of you, my pack. If you're as captivated by this tale of chains, mercy, and impossible bonds as I am, show your support by hitting that like button. It helps this story reach others who crave tales of redemption and forbidden connection. And subscribe to join our growing pack of story lovers. We're building something special here, a community that believes in the power of transformation and second chances. Finally, howl your location in the comments below. Let me know where in the world you're watching from. Are you following Linda's journey from the frozen north, the sunlit south, or somewhere in between? Your pack is worldwide, and I want to know where my fellow story seekers are gathered. Now let's return to the Howling Ridge, where a woman and a wolf are about to change the fate of 2 species forever. The silverleaf grew in impossible places, clinging to rock faces where nothing else dared take root. Linda had learned to follow its silver-green shimmer like a promise, even when that promise led her to the edges of the world. Today, it had brought her higher up the Howling Ridge than she had ever ventured, where the wind screamed with voices that sounded almost human and the mist below swallowed all evidence that solid ground existed anywhere beneath this narrow path. Her fingers worked mechanically, harvesting the precious leaves and tucking them into her leather satchel. Each plant was worth 3 silver pieces in the settlements below. Enough for a week's lodging and supplies. Enough to keep moving, keep running, keep existing in the spaces between belonging anywhere. That's when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to wind or stone. The metallic rattle of chains, and beneath it, a low sound that might have been breathing or might have been pain given voice. Linda's hands froze mid-reach. Her entire body went rigid with recognition before her mind could even process what she was hearing. She knew that sound. She had heard it before 5 years ago, when the night had filled with growls and screams and her world had burned. Don't, her survival instincts whispered. Turn around. Leave. No. But her feet were already moving toward the sound, drawn by some compulsion she couldn't name. She told herself it was curiosity. She told herself she just needed to know what was making that noise so she could properly avoid it. She told herself anything except the truth, that loneliness had carved her hollow, and even the promise of danger felt less terrifying than one more day of absolute isolation. The cliff's edge appeared suddenly and Linda dropped to her knees, crawling the last few feet until she could see over the precipice. What hung there stole the breath from her lungs. A wolf, massive and magnificent even in suffering, suspended over the void by chains that glowed with unnatural golden light. The chains wrapped around his body like burning serpents, and where they touched fur the air shimmered with heat. His head hung low and his breathing was labored, each exhale visible in the cold mountain air. Linda's throat constricted. The memories crashed over her like a physical force. Her village, the flames reaching toward the night sky, her mother's scream cut short, the golden eyes of the wolves as they tore through everything she loved. She had returned from gathering herbs to find bodies in the street and smoke so thick it choked the stars. She had been 23 and whole. By morning she had been 23 and shattered. This is one of them, her trauma screamed. This is the monster that took everything from you. The wolf stirred, sensing her presence perhaps, and slowly raised his head. His eyes found hers, amber like captured sunlight, burning with an intensity that should have sent her scrambling backward. But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because in those eyes she saw something that contradicted every story she had ever been told about werewolves. She saw intelligence. She saw pain. She saw something that looked desperately, impossibly like hope. No, Linda whispered to herself. No, they're monsters. They don't feel. They don't. But even as she said it, she watched a tremor run through the wolf's body, watched him struggle against chains that burned him with every movement, watched exhaustion and suffering play across features that seemed far too expressive for a mindless beast. The wind carried ash and memory. Linda closed her eyes and she was back there, hidden in the tree line, watching her village burn, watching the wolves that had seemed almost drunk with violence, moving with a frenzy that spoke of something unnatural, something wrong. At the time she had thought it was just their nature, that this was what werewolves were. But what if it wasn't? What if there was more to that night than she understood? What if rage and prejudice had convinced her of a simple truth that was actually a complicated lie? I should leave you, she said aloud, though whether she was speaking to the wolf or to herself she didn't know. You'd do the same if our positions were reversed. Your kind showed no mercy to mine. The wolf's eyes tracked her as she stood, as she took a step backward toward the path. This was the sensible thing. The safe thing. She owed nothing to this creature. Her grandmother had taught her to heal, yes, but there were limits. Some wounds were too deep. Some hatreds too justified. Another step backward. The wolf made a sound, not a growl but something softer, something that in a human throat might have been a plea. Linda's feet stopped moving. Damn it, she breathed. She looked down at her hands, healer's hands her grandmother used to call them. Hands meant to ease suffering, to choose compassion even when it was difficult. Especially when it was difficult. But how could she offer healing to the very thing that had stolen her need to heal from this world? The wolf's eyes never left her face. Patient. Waiting. As if he understood that she was fighting a war within herself and the outcome would determine both their fates. Linda moved back to the edge, her heart hammering against her ribs. The chain's anchor points were visible now, carved pillars of stone covered in runes that pulsed with the same golden light as the chains themselves. But ancient and powerful. but the stone around the anchors showed cracks, weathered by time and mountain storms. "This is insane," Linda said, but she was already studying the mechanism, her mind automatically cataloging what would be needed to break it. Years of surviving alone had taught her to read structures, to find weaknesses, to solve problems even when every emotion told her to run. The wolf watched her with those two intelligent eyes, and Linda felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking but opening. A space she had sealed shut 5 years ago because grief lived there and rage and a loneliness so profound she had convinced herself she preferred it to the risk of loss. Her hand extended toward the nearest chain, fingers trembling as they approached the glowing metal. Heat radiated from it and she could smell something acrid like burning herbs mixed with lightning. "If you kill me after this," Linda whispered, "I'll haunt you from whatever comes after death." The wolf made that soft sound again, and this time Linda could have sworn it sounded almost like a promise. Or perhaps a prayer. Her fingertips hovered a breath away from the cursed metal. This was the moment. The choice that would define her. Walk away and remain safely broken, or reach forward and risk everything on the impossible hope that mercy could coexist with grief, that healing could begin even in the heart of someone whose world had been reduced to ash. Linda's safe paw took a breath, closed her eyes and reached forward into the light. The moment Linda's palm made contact with the glowing chain, the world exploded into light. Golden fire erupted from the metal, racing along the links like liquid lightning. The heat didn't burn her. Instead it felt like electricity, like every nerve in her body had been struck by something ancient and aware. Linda gasped, unable to pull her hand away even if she wanted to. The light climbed up her arm, wrapping around her like recognition, like something had been waiting specifically for her touch. The wolf threw his head back and howled, a sound so primal and powerful it seemed to shake the mountain itself. The chains binding him began to crack, fissures of brilliant light splitting the cursed metal. Each break released a pulse of energy that rippled through the air, making the stones beneath Linda's feet tremble. "What's happening?" Linda shouted over the roar of breaking magic, but her voice was swallowed by another surge of light. The chains shattered completely, exploding into 1,000 fragments that dissolved into golden sparks before they could fall into the abyss. The wolf's massive body dropped toward the cliff path, and Linda scrambled backward as he crashed onto the stone where she had been standing moments before. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to flee while the creature was disoriented. But she couldn't move, couldn't look away because the wolf was changing. His form shimmered like heat rising from sun-baked stone. The air around him bent and twisted, and Linda watched in horrified fascination as fur receded, as bones restructured, as the massive wolf collapsed inward and reformed into something else entirely. A man. He lay gasping on the stone, his body racked with tremors. He was tall, she could tell even with him curled on his side, with silver-shot dark hair that fell past his shoulders and skin marked with burns where the chains had held him. He wore the remnants of what might have once been fine clothing, now little more than charred rags. Linda took an involuntary step forward, healer's instincts overriding fear. He was severely weakened, possibly dying. She could see his ribs through damaged skin, see the way his breathing came in shallow, painful gasps. His eyes opened. Those same amber eyes, now set in a human face that was both terrible and beautiful in its stark angles and suffering. They found her immediately, locked onto her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You." His voice was rough, barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of authority even in weakness. "You broke the curse. You showed mercy when you had every reason for vengeance. Who are you?" Linda managed, her own voice shaking. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile or a grimace of pain. "Newton Brave. Alpha King of the Northern Territories." He tried to push himself up, failed and collapsed back onto the stone. "And you've just made yourself a target." "What?" Newton's eyes were already starting to close, consciousness slipping away. But he forced them open one more time, forced the words out with desperate urgency. "They'll come for you now," he whispered. "The ones who put me here. They can't let you live. Not after what you've done." His eyes rolled back and he went still. Linda knelt beside him, pressing trembling fingers to his neck, feeling the faint, unsteady pulse beneath skin that burned with fever. An Alpha King. She had just freed an Alpha King. And somewhere, someone who had imprisoned him was about to learn that their curse had been broken. The wind carried a sound from far below, hunting horns echoing up through the mountain passes. They were already coming. Linda had dragged him, an alpha king though she still couldn't quite believe it, into a cave system she'd discovered weeks ago while tracking mountain herbs. The entrance was concealed behind a waterfall, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. She'd used every ounce of strength to move his unconscious body, her healer's mind cataloging injuries even as her hands shook with adrenaline and disbelief. The hunting horns had grown closer before fading again, the searchers passing by their hiding place. For now they were safe. Newton stirred as she pressed a cloth soaked in medicinal herbs against the worst of his burns. His eyes snapped open, immediately alert despite his weakened state, and his hand shot out to grip her wrist with surprising strength. "Easy," Linda said, freezing in place. "I'm trying to help you." Recognition flickered across his face and his grip loosened, though he didn't release her. "The healer who broke my chains." His voice was stronger now, though still rough. "What's your name?" "Linda. Linda Safepaw." She gently extracted her wrist and continued working on his wounds. "You said they'd come for me. Who are they?" Newton pushed himself into a sitting position, wincing but refusing her help. Even weakened, he radiated authority. Something in the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself despite obvious pain. "Malachi Darkclaw. My former council member. The one who orchestrated my imprisonment." "Why?" Linda asked, though part of her whispered that she shouldn't care, shouldn't want to know anything about werewolf politics. "Because I refuse to wage war against humans." Newton's amber eyes found hers, held them. 5 years ago there were attacks on border villages. Brutal, senseless massacres that violated every treaty we'd built. Malachi claimed humans had broken faith, that we needed to retaliate with overwhelming force. But something felt wrong. Linda's hands stilled on the bandage she was wrapping. "Wrong how?" "The attacks were too chaotic, too violent. Wolves under my command are disciplined, controlled. These were frenzied, almost rabid." He paused, watching her face carefully. "I began investigating and discovered Malachi had been using a substance, Lunar Bane, to control pack members' minds, turning them into weapons. He sent them to destroy human villages to manufacture the war I refused to start." The cave suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. "What villages?" Linda's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Riverbend. Ashenfall. Meadowbrook." "Stop." The word cracked like a whip. Linda stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "Meadowbrook. That was my village. My family." Newton's expression shifted to something that might have been grief. "Then you understand. Malachi killed your people to frame my kind as monsters, to force my hand toward war. When I confronted him with evidence, he had his loyalists ambush me. They couldn't kill an alpha king outright. Pack law forbids it. So they used ancient magic, a curse that could only be broken by someone with blood cause showing mercy." He laughed bitterly. "They thought it impossible. Who would save the very thing they had reason to hate?" Linda felt tears burning her eyes, rage and grief warring in her chest. "The wolves that destroyed my village, they were innocent? Controlled?" "Yes. As was I when Malachi imprisoned me to silence the truth." Newton met her gaze steadily. "Your rescue wasn't coincidence, Linda Safepaw. You were meant to find me. The curse was designed specifically to require someone like you. Someone who lost everything to Malachi's manufactured attacks. He gambled that vengeance would always triumph over mercy." "He was almost right," Linda whispered. "But he wasn't." Newton stood slowly, moving to stand before her. "And now he knows there's a witness to my survival. Someone who proved his greatest weapon, hatred, can be overcome. He'll send everything he has to eliminate us both." Linda looked up at the man who had been a wolf in chains, the Alpha King who represented everything she'd been taught to fear, and felt the ground shift beneath her understanding of the world. "Then we'd better be ready," she heard herself say, surprised by the steel in her own voice. Newton's lips curved into something fierce and approving. "We'd better be fast. Because I can sense them through the pack bond. They're already tracking us and they're bringing an army." They had been moving through the mountain passages for hours when Linda first felt it. A flutter of sensation that wasn't hers. Fear, sharp and urgent, followed by a spike of protective instinct so fierce it made her stumble. "What?" she began, pressing a hand to her chest. Newton caught her elbow, steadying her. You feel it too. It wasn't a question. His amber eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. The soul bond. It's forming. I don't understand. But even as Linda said it, another wave of emotion crashed over her. This time determination mixed with exhaustion that she knew came from him, not her own body. She jerked away from his touch. Make it stop. I can't. Newton's voice was gentle but firm. When you broke the curse, when you chose mercy despite your pain, it created a connection between us. Soul bonds are rare, ancient. They only form between those whose fates are truly intertwined. Linda wrapped her arms around herself, feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with physical vulnerability. I don't want to feel what you feel. I don't want you in my head. I know. There was understanding in his voice, tinged with something that might have been his own reluctance. But right now this bond might be the only thing keeping us alive. Before she could respond, sensation exploded through her consciousness. Danger, close, multiplied by 5, no 6 separate presences. The knowledge came through Newton's awareness, his predator's instinct sensing the hunters before they could be seen or heard. Down. Newton yanked her behind a boulder just as arrows whistled through the space where they'd been standing. Wolves poured from the tree line, 6 of them in human form, armed and moving with coordinated precision. Malachi's hunters. Linda's heart hammered as Newton shifted, his transformation fluid despite his weakened state, placing his massive wolf form between her and the attackers. The bond flared wider and suddenly Linda could feel his strategy, his assessment of each opponent, the pain from wounds not fully healed. She could feel his desperate need to protect her, warring with the knowledge that he wasn't strong enough to fight 6 trained warriors. Without thinking, Linda reached through the strange connection between them, pushing her own awareness toward him. She knew these mountains, knew every hidden path and concealed passage from weeks of foraging. The information flowed from her mind to his, and she felt his surprise, then fierce gratitude. Newton moved and Linda ran, following his lead as he guided them toward an escape route she had shown him through the bond. Arrows struck stone where they'd been. Snarls and shouts echoed behind them. But they moved as one, their separate knowledge combining into something greater than either possessed alone. They lost the hunters in a narrow ravine, collapsing finally in a sheltered alcove where water trickled down stone walls. Linda's lungs burned, her legs shook, but they were alive. Newton shifted back to human form, his breathing as ragged as hers. You saved us. The bond, you used it. I didn't have a choice, Linda said, but it wasn't quite true. She'd made a choice to trust the connection, to let him in if only for a moment. Linda. Newton's voice was serious. The bond grows stronger with use, with trust. Eventually we'll be able to share thoughts, feel each other's pain and joy as if they were our own. That level of intimacy terrifies me, she finished, meeting his eyes. I've spent 5 years making sure I never let anyone close enough to hurt me again. I know. His hand reached toward hers, stopped just short of touching. But Malachi knows about the bond now. He'll use it against us. And the only way to survive what's coming is to stop fighting it. Linda looked at his outstretched hand, felt the echo of his emotions through the bond, respect, growing trust, and underneath it all, a loneliness that mirrored her own. Slowly she placed her hand in his. The bond surged, and for one crystalline moment she felt everything. His 5 years of isolation, his guilt over the lives lost to Malachi's schemes, his fierce determination to protect her even if it cost him everything. And he felt her in return. Her grief, her fear, the tiny seed of hope she'd been trying so hard to bury. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard, shaken by the depth of connection. They're regrouping, Newton said quietly, his senses extending through the bond. We have maybe an hour before they pick up our trail again. And this time Malachi is coming personally. They encountered the survivors at dawn, near a stream where Linda had stopped for water. 5 of them, haggard and armed with scavenged weapons. The woman leading them had a scar down her cheek, and her eyes went wide with recognition. Newton Brave. The name came out like a curse. The Wolf King. Linda felt Newton tense beside her, felt his resigned acceptance through the bond. I mean, you no harm, he said, raising his hands. No harm. A man stepped forward, rage twisting his features. Your kind killed my son while he slept. He looked at Linda. And you travel with him? What are you? Newton moved to shield Linda, and that simple gesture decided something in her. She stepped between the survivors and him, choosing her side. You're right, Linda said, voice steady despite her racing heart. I'm protecting him. Because the wolves who attacked you weren't acting of their own will. Lies, someone spat. Truth. Newton's voice carried authority even exhausted. By pack law I invoke parley. Hear me, then decide if you want blood. The scarred woman lowered her spear slightly. Speak. Newton produced documents from inside his shirt, water-stained but legible. Evidence that Malachi Darkclaw used Lunar Bane to control pack members, turning them into weapons against human villages. Linda watched the survivors' faces as Newton explained. Proof of poison purchases, testimonies from wolves who remembered nothing of their attacks, patterns proving the massacres were calculated strikes to manufacture war. Meadowbrook was my village, Linda said quietly. I lost everyone. I had every reason to let him die. But the truth matters more than revenge. The scarred woman's hands shook as she studied the documents. The wolves were victims too? Yes, Newton said. Malachi orchestrated everything to seize power and launch the war I refused to start. Because Malachi is coming with an army, Linda added, fierce now. When he finds us, he won't stop. He'll exterminate every human settlement within reach, then blame it on Newton's followers. Through the bond she felt Newton's gratitude, his fear for her safety. She'd just declared herself on his side before her own people. There was no going back. The scarred woman looked between them. There's talk in settlements. Rumors of wolves gathering under a new leader. Villages preparing for war. It's already beginning, Newton said grimly. Help us stop it or watch it consume everyone you have left. The survivors exchanged glances. Finally the woman nodded. We'll come with you. But if you're lying, I'll kill you myself. As they moved out together, an impossible alliance, Linda felt the weight of her choice. She defended a werewolf to human survivors, crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Through the bond, Newton's voice whispered in her mind for the first time. Thank you. And I'm sorry for what this will cost you. Behind them she sensed something else through the bond. Malachi's forces drawing closer, and with them a darkness that made her blood run cold. The border outpost was a collection of ramshackle buildings where refugees gathered, fleeing the escalating tensions between territories. Linda and Newton entered separately, playing the parts they'd rehearsed, a wandering herbalist and a wounded traveler seeking sanctuary. The survivors they'd won over stayed hidden nearby, ready to extract them if things went wrong. Inside the main hall, displaced families huddled around fires, their fear palpable. But Linda noticed others too, wolves in human form watching the refugees with calculating eyes. Malachi's people pretending to offer protection while gathering intelligence. Linda moved through the crowd with her healer's bag, offering remedies and listening. People talked freely to someone treating their wounds, and what she heard made her blood run cold. Wolves were gathering in the northern territories. Villages were being evacuated, or burned. War was being whispered like an inevitability. She was tending a child's fever when she overheard two of Malachi's supporters talking near the supply room. More Lunar Bane arriving tomorrow. Enough to control 50 wolves this time. Keep your voice down. If anyone discovers the stockpile. Linda's hands stilled. She knew that herb. Her grandmother had taught her about it. A rare plant that grew only in shadow valleys, toxic in its natural form but capable of overwhelming the will when refined properly. She'd thought it was extinct. Through the bond she felt Newton's alertness. He'd heard it too wherever he was in the building. That night while the outpost slept, Linda slipped into the supply room. Hidden behind sacks of grain she found them, crates of dried Lunar Bane, enough to poison an army. Her hands shook as she gathered samples, documenting everything with the careful precision her grandmother had taught her. She was tucking the evidence into her bag when footsteps approached. Linda pressed herself into the shadows, barely breathing. Two wolves entered carrying more crates. Malachi wants this moved before dawn. Once word spreads that the dead Alpha King has returned, we'll need every controlled wolf we have to sell the story. What story? The other asked. That Newton Brave used forbidden dark magic to escape death. That he's corrupted, dangerous. The council will have no choice but to declare martial law, and Malachi will finally have his war. Linda's heart hammered. They were going to use Newton's survival against him, twist his resurrection into proof of evil. Every life he'd try to save would be branded as dark magic. The wolves left and Linda crept out, finding Newton in their arranged meeting spot behind the stables. Through the bond, she felt his grim understanding even before she spoke. "They're going to frame you," she whispered. "Your return isn't just a threat to Malachi's power, it's his greatest weapon." Newton's jaw clenched. "If he convinces the council I'm corrupted by dark magic, they'll hunt me as an abomination. And anyone who stands with me." "We have proof now," Linda said, showing him the lunar bane samples. "We can expose him. If we survive long enough to reach the council stones." Newton's eyes fixed on something behind her, and through the bond, Linda felt his spike of alarm. She turned slowly. A figure emerged from the shadows. A massive wolf with silver-streaked fur and eyes that gleamed with cruel intelligence. Malachi Darkclaw had found them. "How touching," the traitor said, shifting to human form. "The dead king and his human pet. I was hoping you'd come." He smiled, and it was the expression of a predator who'd just cornered his prey. "Did you really think I didn't know you were here?" Around them, wolves materialized from the darkness. 10, 15, 20 of them. All loyal to Malachi. All ready to kill. Linda reached for Newton's hand, the bond flaring between them. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. Malachi's smile widened. "Seize them. And make sure the human lives long enough to watch her precious Alpha King die." The survivors struck before Malachi could give the order. Newton grabbed Linda and ran, wolves howling behind. They crashed toward the cliffs where chains had broken. Newton shifted mid-run. Linda climbed onto his back as he leaped across gaps. Arrows whistled through darkness. They reached the narrow cliff path. An arrow struck stone. Another hit home. Newton stumbled, pain exploding through the bond. Linda felt the arrow pierce his shoulder, felt his legs buckle. "Newton." She crawled to him as he shifted back, blood streaming. His consciousness flickered through the bond. Malachi's wolves emerged. "How poetic," the traitor said. "Where you broke free becomes where you die." Linda pressed against Newton's wound. "Poison on the arrow, lunar bane refined to kill." "Stay with me," she whispered, opening herself fully to the bond. Her energy flowed into him, fighting poison, keeping his heart beating. In his fevered state, Newton's thoughts bled into hers. Memories of him and Malachi as brothers. Warning signs ignored. Malachi's bitterness, hunger for war. "I knew," Newton's thoughts whispered. "He was changing. But he was my friend. I trusted him too long." "You believed in redemption," Linda answered. "That's not weakness." His eyes focused. "Understanding. Forgiveness. Love." The scarred woman appeared with companions, weapons raised. Enough to pause Malachi's advance. "Send the message," Newton gasped, pressing his signet ring into Linda's hand. "My followers need to know I live." The woman took it. "Where?" "The council stones. Tell them Newton Brave demands trial by pack law. Tell them war ends now." She disappeared with 3 others. "You think the council will save you?" Malachi laughed. "I control them." "Then let it be in the light," Newton replied, pulling himself upright. "Let everyone see what you've become." Malachi's eyes narrowed. A public trial was risky, refusing showed weakness. 7 days. The council stones. He withdrew. Linda supported Newton, the bond burning bright. 7 days to reach the council stones. 7 days for confrontation that would decide everything. Through the bond, Newton's voice. "I won't let him hurt you." "We protect each other," Linda answered. "That's what this means." The path stretched into darkness. Behind, Malachi's wolves prowled. But the bond pulsed with shared strength. They'd broken chains together. They'd faced trial together. And whatever came, life or death, victory or defeat, they'd face that together too. The council stones rose like ancient teeth, carved with runes older than memory. Sacred ground where pack law ruled for 1,000 years. Newton and Linda arrived as sun reached zenith. Hundreds of wolves gathered. Some loyal to Newton, more to Malachi, many uncertain. Malachi stood at the circle's center. The dead king returns. Or should I say the corrupted king? One who bargained with dark magic. Newton stood tall. "I invoke trial by pack law." "Present your evidence." "Gladly." Malachi produced forged documents, testimony of forbidden rituals, and most damning, a human witch who enchants you. The crowd murmured, hostile. She controls him, Malachi continued. What alpha king willingly bonds with a human unless bewitched? She broke his chains with sorcery. Lies, Newton snarled. An ancient she-wolf stepped forward. The human will speak. Pack law demands all evidence be heard. No human had ever spoken here. Linda stepped into the circle, hundreds of eyes tracking her. I'm Linda Safepaw. 5 years ago, Malachi's mind-controlled wolves destroyed my village. She pulled out lunar bane samples. I'm a healer. I recognize this poison. Malachi used it to control your people, manufacture attacks he blamed on Newton. Lies from a witch, Malachi sneered. Then test it, Linda challenged. Examine the evidence. The she-wolf studied them. The challenges issued. Do you accept testing, Counselor Darkclaw? Uncertainty flickered across Malachi's face. Words can be fabricated, he said. There's only one true test. Trial by combat. Let the ancestors decide truth. The crowd erupted. Newton stepped forward. I accept. No. You're corrupted. Your victory proves nothing. Malachi looked at Linda. Her. If she broke your chains through pure mercy, let her face judgment. Through the bond, no. Absolutely not. The she-wolf nodded. Valid under pack law. The human may choose a champion or face combat herself. I volunteer as her opponent, Malachi said. Let me test this innocent healer against a true wolf. The trap closed. Refusing confirmed fraud. Fighting meant death. Newton as champion proved enchantment. Linda looked at Newton, their bond blazing. I accept, she said. I'll face him myself. Newton's anguish flooded the bond, but Linda squeezed his hand. Through their connection she showed him what she'd realized. This was never about evidence. This was about courage. About a human standing before wolves without fear, proving mercy and truth were stronger than violence and lies. Even if it killed her. The she-wolf raised her staff. At sunset. Trial by combat. Winner claims truth. Malachi shifted to massive wolf form and held his challenge. Linda didn't look away. The sun touched the horizon, painting the council stones blood red. Linda stood in the circle, weaponless, facing Malachi's massive wolf form. Trust me, she sent through the bond. Trust us. Malachi lunged. Linda threw the lunar bane vial at stone before him. It shattered, releasing toxic fumes. Malachi recoiled. The crowd gasped as the poison's distinctive scent filled the air, unmistakable to any wolf. Smell it, Linda shouted. That's what he used. What drove your people mad, made them killers against their will. The ancient she-wolf stepped forward, sniffing. Her eyes widened. Lunar bane. Refined for mind control. He turned to Malachi. You dare bring this to sacred ground? Malachi shifted to human form, rage twisting his features. I brought order. Newton would have let humans destroy us. So you destroyed them first, Newton said, stepping into the circle. Murdered innocents. Controlled our people. All for power you call righteousness. I saved us. Malachi roared, lunging at the council elders. Newton moved faster. The collision was devastating, two alphas crashing together in primal fury. They fought as wolves, massive and terrible. But Newton had something Malachi didn't. Through the bond, Linda's strength flowed. Her conviction, her mercy, her belief in redemption. Newton's jaws found Malachi's throat. The traitor collapsed, defeated. I was saving us, Malachi gasped. From contamination. From becoming them. No, Newton said quietly. You became exactly what you feared. A monster who saw enemies everywhere. Malachi fled into wilderness, broken and exiled. The she-wolf raised her staff. The trial concludes. Newton braves truth, stands proven. She looked at Linda. And his mate recognized. The human who showed mercy when hatred was easier. She has earned her place. The pack held acceptance. The war was over. 3 months later, Linda stood at the borderlands. The place once called No Man's Land was transforming. A trading post, a sanctuary, a bridge. Newton approached, arms wrapping around her. Through the bond she felt his peace. Strange, Linda murmured, watching human children play with young wolves nearby. A year ago I was alone, convinced grief was all I had left. Now you've found purpose, Newton finished. Transformed pain into healing. Turned barriers into bridges. Linda leaned into him, the bond pulsing like a second heartbeat. She'd lost her first family to violence. But she'd found a new one, not replacing what was lost but honoring it by building something better. The sun set over the borderlands, no longer a place of fear but of hope. And Linda Safepaw, once a wanderer with nothing but ghosts, finally felt what she'd been searching for. Home. Linda found her home. Her chains are broken. Her story complete. But the pack hungers for more tales of impossible bonds and supernatural destiny. Your next story awaits and the Alpha commands you watch it. Click the next video now. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Subscribe to Run with the Pack. Comment where you're watching from. And remember, the best stories are the ones we share together. Until the next moon rises, my pack. Until the next story calls.